Hello Year 11. This is the third lesson in the Unit 2.4 on Variation and Evolution. Today's lesson we're learning to understand the difference between sexual and asexual reproduction. If you have numbered the pages in your book from the page with the hand on it for investigating variation in humans as page 1 onwards, you should need to turn to page 11, please. It should say sexual reproduction on the top of the page. So if you were asked to define what sexual reproduction was in an exam, what would you say? Perhaps you might say that sexual reproduction is the formation of offspring from the fusion of gametes, and fusion is called fertilization. In America they spell it with a Z, in the UK we spell it with an S. So when we write this statement, what do we mean by the formation of offspring? Offspring are the children or the baby animals or the plants that are created. From the fusion means joining, and of gametes we mean sex cells like sperm and egg, or it could be pollen and ovules. So this is what we mean by fertilization. So WJC is very keen on you to be absolutely clear on what sexual reproduction actually is defined as. So this would be your standard definition. Please don't say the meeting of sex cells. The sperm does not go up to the egg and say hi, okay? The sperm actually joins with or fuses with or fertilizes the egg. So this part is particularly important, the fusion or joining part. So do you remember what process makes these sex cells or gametes? Well, back in B2.2, we looked at cell division and stem cells, and there were two types of cell division that we looked at, meiosis and mitosis. Meiosis is the type of cell division that makes the sex cells or gametes. Mitosis is the type of cell division that is required for growth and repair of tissues. So a quick recap of the difference between mitosis and meiosis and what happens, okay? So this is a retrieval practice. So in this parent cell, it's just showing us 4 chromosomes, okay? And this parent cell could be any body cell at all in mitosis. The DNA copies itself, so this is why you can see the chromosomes looking like little X's, and then they divide, they split to become 2 daughter cells. These daughter cells are genetically identical. Try not to say just the same, okay? They are genetically identical in terms of the number of chromosomes and in terms of the type of genetic material. So this is the type of cell division, as we said, that is needed for growth and repair of tissues to make sure every single cell, okay, has exactly the same type of DNA. Whereas meiosis, this parent cell would be in the sex organs. So in humans, it would be in the testes of the male, in the ovaries of the female. If it was a plant, it would be in the ovaries of the carpel of a flower, and it would be in the stamens or the anther of the stamens of the flower too, okay? So it starts off with 4 chromosomes at the beginning, and the next bit is very, very similar. The DNA replicates. After it's replicated, what happens is the X's of the chromosomes, they look a little bit like arms and legs. They switch over, okay? In other words, we have what we call crossing over happens. And crossing over mixes up the DNA and helps to increase the variety or variation of the cells. The DNA then, or the cell, splits into 2 daughter cells first of all, and then splits again. And what you'll notice is the number of chromosomes are half from the original parent cell. So with 4 chromosomes to begin with, only 2 in these daughter cells. So not only have we got what we call reduction division and a haploid number, But also, each of these daughter cells will have a slightly different combination of genes from where crossing over has happened. That means every single sperm, so if this was happening in the testes and these all developed into sperm, every single sperm would be slightly genetically different and every single egg would be slightly different. So every time your parents had another child, they wouldn't be the same as you. They wouldn't be genetically identical to you because of mixing up of the DNA. Half of your DNA comes from mum's egg, half comes from dad's sperm. So you don't have a full set of DNA from both. So on page 11, make sure you've written the definitions. I meant to say earlier to pause the video. So if you need to pause the video and just return to the first slide, you can do. There is a diagram halfway down the page showing you the male body cell in the testes and the female body cell in the ovaries, both with 46 chromosomes. Meiosis occurring to create the sperm and the egg, both with 23 chromosomes. And when they join at fertilization, it makes a cell that has 46 chromosomes. We call this cell the zygote, okay? So we can summarize this with a little flowchart. So this is quite an old-fashioned word, gonad. A gonad is an old-fashioned word for a sex organ, so something like the testes or the ovaries. So this could be in the male, it could be the testes, it could be in the female, it could be the ovaries. We have the first process happening. Can you write this in the box? Meiosis, which as we've explained is reduction division. This creates our gametes. Another word for this is sex cell. So you should know this word, what it means. These gametes are haploid. In other words, they have half number. At fertilization, so you need to write this in the box, we have 2 haploid cells. Our sperm, if it's human 23, plus our egg is 23 chromosomes. So that's going to make our zygote with a diploid number, which would be 46 chromosomes here. We then have a different type of cell division occurring, okay, from that first fertilized egg cell to get to a baby over 9 months. That zygote has to undergo mitosis, the type of cell division for growth. It creates the embryo, which is diploid, the same as the zygote. Further mitosis happens, so can you write this in the missing box, to create the adult, okay, or to create the child first that is born and then the adult, okay, as they grow, and then they are able to produce their own sex cells in their gonads, okay, as they mature. So make sure that you've filled in that flowchart and you understand where meiosis fits into this flowchart, where mitosis fits in, and fertilization, and the significance of fertilization restoring the diploid number. Okay. So on the opposite page then, okay, we have got asexual reproduction, which we're going to come to in a second. So just continuing with sexual reproduction, you realise that when 2 haploid sex cells fuse, a diploid cell is formed. That word fuse, you can have join, you can have fertilise, remember, not meet. We've just explained that a diploid cell is called a zygote. You may not have heard that word before, okay? And the zygote is going to divide by mitosis to develop into an embryo, an early form of the baby, in which the somatic, another word for this is body cells, are all going to be diploid. So every single cell in your body will be diploid and have 46 chromosomes apart from the sperm and the egg. So, if we've got our definition of sexual reproduction, how would we define what asexual reproduction is? It's just one letter in front of sexual. So it's the opposite. There are no gametes, there's no fertilization, and there's no need for both male and female parents to start with. Humans cannot reproduce asexually. If we could, then I'd be able to like take off my arm and grow a whole new Mrs. Wood out of it, okay? And we can't do that. So it's the formation of offspring without the use of gametes, and it involves only one parent. So there are limited organisms that can carry out this type of reproduction, and we're going to talk about some of them in a minute. So pause the video, write your definition, these 2 paragraphs, okay, so you're clear on what asexual reproduction is. The diagram on the right-hand side shows you amoeba. Now, amoeba is a single-celled organism. It likes living in puddles and ponds, and it basically looks like a simple animal cell. It has a nucleus, it has a cell membrane, and it has cytoplasm. I missed out the M, okay. And when amoeba reproduces by asexual reproduction, the first thing it does, as you can see in the diagram, the nucleus divides, and then the cytoplasm divides, and you get 2 daughter cells. What's special about this type of asexual reproduction is that the 2 offspring are genetically identical to the original parent. In other words, okay, it is also called cloning. They are cloned cells, genetically identical cells, okay? You could even describe it as being a form of mitosis, cell division. Now, there are a variety of different methods of asexual reproduction, so you may see these words, okay, appearing. They include fission. Fission is the opposite of fusion. Fission is separating. We have budding, which we'll see in an organism called Hydra in a minute. We have regenerating various parts of the body. So lizards, for example, if you try and catch them by their tail, okay, the tail will drop off and they'll regenerate the tail at some point. We have spore formation, gemmi and plantlets, okay, which we will look at when we're looking at tissue culture. Using cuttings, something called grafting, where one plant will be grafted onto another, and cloning. Now, we're going to have a completely separate lesson for cloning, but many plants and animals use these methods of reproduction. Sometimes they use both asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction to maximize their chances of increasing their numbers, because that is the whole point of reproduction, to increase their numbers and ensure that their species survives. So, here are our amoeba, as we've said before, and amoeba demonstrates what we call fission, okay? It's called binary fission. So you can actually see in our little animation here at the bottom, there's our single amoeba, copies its nucleus, the cytoplasm divides, and we've got 2 genetically identical daughter cells at the end, okay? So underneath, you've got some space that says name some different organisms and their methods of asexual reproduction. Keep it brief, okay? Just use a line for each one so you can describe that amoeba reproduces using binary fission. This was the organism that I called Hydra. Hydra actually belongs to the same group as jellyfish and sea anemones. And we can see here's our Hydra. It is not a plant, okay? A Hydra is actually an animal. And we can see it's got these tentacle-like structures to it. And at the side here, we've got a little bud. And it buds, creates another Hydra, and that bud, that new Hydra, will separate and become a brand new Hydra. This Hydra will be genetically identical to its original parent that it budded from, okay? Yeast also reproduce by budding. So when you were in year 7, you will have seen yeast in a video underneath the microscope, and the yeast cells look like they're creating like a little bubble on the side, and that bubble will grow into a new yeast cell. So put a sentence describing that Hydra reproduced by budding. Then we've got some other methods of asexual reproduction. We've got non-vascular plants. That means that they don't have things like veins to carry water and xylem. So mosses, and also the females of some animals. So things like wasps, aphids, sponges, corals and lizards. They all form identical offspring asexually by something called parthenogenesis. Now, you will not be expected to remember that word in the exam. But basically what parthenogenesis is the development of an unfertilized egg. So there's only one parent involved, the female. And this unfertilized egg, okay, will grow into a diploid female, okay? So this is almost like there's no sex chromosomes, okay? There's no joining, there's no fusion, okay? It just starts as an unfertilized haploid egg and it develops into a diploid female. A non-fertilized egg, okay, may develop into a haploid male, and a fertilized egg may develop into a diploid female, okay? So that is a special type of asexual reproduction, parthenogenesis, okay? So write that down. You can say for wasps, aphids, sponges, corals, lizards. Then we've got plants. We've got a variety of different methods that plants can reproduce asexually, okay? We sometimes call this propagating or reproducing vegetatively, okay? In other words, asexually. So they don't need two plants to get together. Each new plant has the same DNA as the parent and therefore is a clone. That definition of a clone is they are genetically identical, and you will see that in our next lesson when we talk about cloning, and in particular Dolly the sheep. So here's some plants that reproduce in this way, okay? So we've got potatoes. If you leave one in a cupboard, it will get these little buds, okay, that will appear on the potato. And these buds are growing by mitosis to produce new genetically identical offspring. Actual seed potatoes, when they bud like this is what's going to create the plant above the ground, and then the potatoes will grow off of the roots underneath the ground. We call them eyes, or sometimes they're also referred to as chits, okay? So these will grow into the new potato plant, and you can get new potatoes growing off them. So potatoes form buds. Then we've got a variety of different plants that use something called bulbs or rhizomes, okay? So our most famous in Wales is the daffodil up here. But also we've got garlic, onion, green onions, leeks, okay? These are spring onions, the green onions, irises, anything that is planted using a bulb. If you plant one bulb 1 year, you'll get your daffodil plant will grow. But by the second year, the bulb literally splits itself, okay, and grows 2 plants rather than the 1. Sometimes even more than that. So you can actually take a bulb of garlic, take a single clove out of the bulb and plant each clove separately, and the following year you will get bulbs growing where each clove of garlic had been planted, okay? So this is what we call perenniating organs, okay? Corms are very similar as well. They're just another example of a bulb, okay? So we can see if you want to split them up, then later you can harvest them and you can plant them elsewhere to get your plant to grow around the garden in various places. Strawberries use something called a runner. And a runner is just like a stem that comes off from the main plant, and where the stem touches the ground, it sends off roots into the ground and grows leaves above the ground, and we say this is the cloned plant. So you could actually separate it from its original parent and it will grow into a genetically identical plant to the original plant that it came from. So this can also happen with weeds that grow in your lawn. They grow like this and they spread rapidly everywhere. So that's runners with strawberries. And then we're going to go on to tissue culture and cloning. Now, I'm going to come across these separately. I'm going to do a different video for the bottom of page 12, tissue culture, for page 13, taking a cutting, 14, cloning Dolly, and 15, adult cell cloning. And then there are a couple of pages where there are some GCSE style questions. So I want you to turn now to page 19 for me, please. And I'm going to skip through some of these pages. And as I say, I will deal with those in a completely separate lesson. So we've got some pages now with 3 different tables on page 19 and 20. And the tables look like they are the same. They are not, okay? We've got a comparison of sexual and asexual reproduction. We've got on page 20 advantages and disadvantages of asexual reproduction on the next table. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is to look at comparing sexually and asexually reproduced offspring. Okay, so in each picture, the set of plants produced asexually are identical to each other in their appearance, their phenotype, and their genetic makeup, their genotype. Okay, so the difference between sexual and asexual. Asexual plants are identical in their phenotype and genotype, whereas sexual plants, sexual reproduction, are not identical in their phenotype and genotype. If we start looking at our sexually produced plants, so we've got apple blossom and different apple varieties, okay, that we've got here, and we've got this particular plant is called a dog strangling vine, okay, a very, very unusual name for it. So these different varieties of apples were produced from sexual reproduction. Their genetic makeup, their genotype is different, and they also look different, so that's their phenotype is different. So their phenotype is different because of the different genotypes. So they might taste different, they might have a different colour, different shape, they might be used for different things like as an eating apple or as a cooking apple, okay, or for making cider or juice, okay. So they are genetically different, genotype and phenotype both different. The dog strangling vine varies, so we've got pink flowers on this one, white on the other one, because again the plants have a different genetic makeup, different genotype, different phenotype. So put that into your first table on page 19. Sexually produced animals, okay, so very, very similar here. These penguins may look like they are exactly the same, and it would be difficult for us to tell them apart, but they are actually genetically different because they reproduce by sexual reproduction. So there would be a male penguin sperm would have to meet the female penguin's egg, and then the egg shell would surround, okay, inside the female, and the female would lay the egg. And we know that they keep them on their feet to stop them getting cold, and use a flap of skin over the top to keep them warm. These caterpillars also look like they're all the same, but they are actually genetically different. And they also have variation in coloration, and that's because a female a butterfly and a male butterfly, okay, would have reproduced. So what about the advantages and or benefits of asexual reproduction? So the advantages of asexual reproduction are that each type, that the various methods can, Bearing in mind the various methods can you deduce the advantages or benefits of asexual reproduction. Normally we'd get you to talk within your group and try and come up with 3 advantages of why it benefits you to reproduce asexually. Okay, so this is the first column on the top of page 20. Okay, advantages of asexual reproduction. Okay, so have a little think, see if you can come up with some advantages. Pause the video, and these are some of the things you might have included. So there's no time and energy wasted trying to find a mate because you just literally split into 2. There's continuous reproduction, and large numbers can be produced much faster as well. So it's quick and large numbers can be produced. Favourable environmental conditions can be exploited. So if it's good environmental conditions, you can reproduce quickly. If it's poor environmental conditions, you can hang fire and reproduce later. If the parent is of a genetic good quality, because they are going to be clones, the offspring, they will also be exactly the same, genetically identical, so they will be good quality. Disadvantages of asexual reproduction, okay? So the offspring may find it difficult to survive if the environment changes, because if they are all exactly the same, there's no chance for them to evolve and change. So mutation happens, okay, and causes a change in an organism, and this can be beneficial or it can be detrimental to the organism to help it survive. Just like the last bullet point on the advantage of asexual reproduction, if a parent is of poor quality, then the offspring will also be poor quality because they will be genetically identical. And finally, disadvantage of asexual reproduction. Because the offspring colonize the same area as the parent, there will be competition between the organisms, and overcrowding can easily result. Whether it's a plant or an animal, whatever resources they will be competing for, they will be overcrowded and they may not all be able to receive those resources that they require. So, final table is our advantages and disadvantages of sexual reproduction now. So we've got 3 for the advantages or benefits, that almost all of the benefits will result from variation. In other words, remember, variation is that mixing up of DNA. And that mixing up of DNA comes from meiosis, first of all, halving the DNA and crossing over, causing variation. And then the sperm and egg joining together to create variation for each sperm that joins with each egg or pollen with ovule to create variety. A species that reproduces sexually is able to adapt to changes in the environment, okay, because they can evolve. If the parent is of poor quality, then the offspring don't necessarily have to be of poor quality. That should be of, not off, because of meiosis and fertilization, because the mixing up of the DNA and then rejoining of half of the DNA from one parent and half from the other. And finally, organisms can colonize a new area very easily, okay, because they've adapted perhaps to changes in that area. Finally, our disadvantages of sexual reproduction. 3 here. Time and energy is spent to find a mate. There might be fewer offspring being reproduced in sexual reproduction, especially because reproduction is not continuous, and particularly in species like birds and in humans, okay, in the animal species, they may have far less offspring because they might be looking after the offspring, okay? So in terms of birds, they feed the baby birds in the nest. If you have too many, you will not be able to feed them all, okay? And because of genetic variation, poor quality offspring can also result from good quality parents, okay? Because the mixing up of the genes and the DNA is completely random. So I'm going to leave that at that point for this lesson today. And our 4th lesson will be about cloning. So we'll go back and cover the various different ways that we can clone organisms. Thank you.